about that and that conversation because we do have one more left. Josh, just before we went on break, I asked you that question that there seems to be over-regulation, if I may say so, from the regulator, that is the CBK, and there's a lobby group here that seems to be in sync with the regulator. Is that what the next team should do? Sort of fight for the voices of the CEOs of these banks under the umbrella?
Thank you, Simba. I'm not particularly sure whether, because when we say that they're in sync, and Mwendo mentioned this, is it the regulator that is in sync with the CBK, or is it the CBK that is in sync with the regulator?
Yeah.
I think what KB has been able to do is maintain a level of stability, because we're dealing with a lobby group that has very many multifaceted interests within itself.
Yes.
And then dealing with a regulator that also has interests that might be conflicting. So I think the fact that they're in sync with the regulator speaks perhaps to the success of the lobby, or of the banking lobby.
Yes.
Now, perhaps there are things that they could do better. I'm sure there are things that they could do better. But I think the strategy they're employing is one that looks at incremental gains as opposed to very radical changes in the sector. And in any banking sector in any country, radical changes are not something that you really want as an industry, or as a regulator, or even as the economy. So I think we're looking at a very conservative body, a very conservative lobby body that works towards small incremental changes and then builds on those for better, which I think is a good strategy, if you ask me.
Yes, but I won't challenge you on that, Josh, because I know you're a policy analyst and you know exactly what it is. Let me probably bring in Gabriel to look at it from a different perspective. Gabriel, yes, there have been some rumblings in the entire of 2020 and 2021 that, well, why can't you give us the leeway for us to price the facilities in the economy properly? How is it that they're in sync? And I know when we got into coronavirus pandemic, the outgoing chairman, Joshua Igara, actually did come and say, forget the era for 20 plus rates. It is done. And that's what the regulator wanted as well. How do we understand that sync?
So, I think just to comment on them, the lobby group and the regulator being in sync,
yes.
It's not the worst case scenario, because actually, if you've spoken to any of these bank heads, they'll tell you that having a good regulator or a strong regulator is a big selling point for them internationally.
Yes.
Because then sort of international investors are comfortable in that the regulator is keeping a keen eye on the market, on performance, and on some of the level of compliance that is required by banks. So
yes.
It's a good thing to have a strong regulator in that perspective. Now, as far as interest rates go, you might disagree with the regulator that, we want to have some room to, to price in the risk.
Yes.
But what does that mean for you? It does not automatically mean more profit. Because you see, you also have to strike a balance. Just because you're given room to charge 17, 18% does not mean that there'll be customers to pay.
Yes.
Now, someone like Equity Bank or even KCB Group, their cost of funds is 2 to 3%. Family Bank is raising a bond at 12, 13%, 30%. Those are two banks that are not similar. Those are not the same kind of banks, because one is raising capital at 13, the other one, the cost of funds is a whole 10% lower.
Yes.
So if you were to open it up, Equity Bank can actually give us loans at 10, 12% and still make 10%. But Family Bank has to make money somewhere, so they have to charge you higher. So that, I think, is why you have the lobby group balancing in between, because they're saying some of our members have a higher cost of funding. They have to make their money somewhere. Someone like Equity Bank can comfortably give its entire balance sheet to the government and still make a lot of money out of it.
Yes.
So there's obviously that difference between the banks, and that's why you can still see the lobby has to take care of those members with a very high cost of funding, while also protecting those who don't mind giving it cheaply to the government. Because you see, it's just a balance between those two kind of members. Really, the cost of fund is a driving factor as to how much they want to charge. And of course, the CBK, like I've always said, in terms of pricing these loans, is driven by the government's borrowing rate.
Pretty
because
much.
if they drive it higher, they drive the CBR higher, the government has to borrow more expensively. That's a problem. So it's a balance.
It's a balance, gentlemen. I'm not getting into that just because of time, because there could be a whole lot of conversation around that area. But I want us to introduce the next subject by listening to CS Ukur Yatani, who's saying that the government is taking proper policy reforms that are going to make sure that as from 2021, in fact, no, as from now, that all the money that comes in is going to be used the way it's supposed to be used. One, and that the level of corruption in the country is going to go down. Let's listen to him.
Many of these countries have suffered liquidity challenges in terms of financing their own budgets as a result of drop in the revenue, as a result of low economic activity. We've applied, and to a great extent, we also gotten support, a 6-month break for payment of most of this. But for Kenya, it's not a significant amount because payments that were falling within the period indicated were not very significant. But however, we've also received the same support. And we applied the money in managing COVID mitigations, mainly in the sector of health, also supporting our own budget to some extent by enhancing service delivery.
Pretty much, that's where we are. Now, that's exactly what he's saying. On top of that, he's saying the policy reforms are going to be key. Josh, this is all new now. Is it possible for us to say that the government is going to come up with policy reforms within, as opposed to what our creditors exactly want? What can work? Is it for us to come with these policy reforms ourselves, or wait for our creditors like the IMF and World Bank to tell us exactly what we need to do before we get this money?
I think at the point at which we are, because once the IMF steps in,
yes,
then you are clearly at crisis level in terms of debt management, and the IMF steps in with conditions. So at this point in time, we really have no choice but to take on board the policies that the IMF proposes, because the IMF is telling you, listen, you have debt management problems, you have liquidity problems, and,
yes,
and you need money that you otherwise wouldn't get on the market, whether it's the concessional market or the commercial market, because no one would be willing to lend. But here we are willing to lend, but on the following conditions. So I think we that bus left the park. The bus for us coming up with our own policies, at least with regard to this particular facility.
Yes,
we have no choice but to follow the policies that are brought on board by the IMF. What I find curious, however, is, I mean, for a long time we've been saying, I mean, this is not the first IMF facility, and we keep saying, you know, this is helping in COVID recovery. I keep saying this. There is only one solution to the COVID pandemic that is both an economic solution and a health solution, because you find that whatever solution you have for this pandemic, if it's a health solution, then it hurts the economy. If it's an economic solution, it hurts the health status or the health aspect of the pandemic. So if you say open up, then you have a rise in infections. If you say close down, then the economy, because the only policy intervention that does not conflict the two interests is vaccination. And if you look at our budget for this year, and vaccination, of course, is controversial because there are people who are anti-vaccination and so on and so forth. But if you look at what we budgeted for the year for vaccination, it's a measly 2 billion shillings. And we're talking about just about 1% of our adult population vaccinated at this point in time. So then you begin to ask yourself, I mean, is this COVID thing a thing that government just keeps saying to buy themselves room because we're already at crisis levels before COVID, and now we have something we can point to and say we need to direct funds here? and in this case is the IMF a co-conspirator in this issue? Because I really don't see. If you ask me what the amount of the IMF facility has gone to COVID relief and COVID funds, I mean, what has changed between before we got the loan and after? In terms of people are still paying the same bills, you know, in terms of, I mean, access to wash services is the same. So all these things begin to make you begin to question whether really there is intentional policy to get out of this rat that is COVID, or whether COVID is a convenient excuse that can be used for political expediency. And now I'm speaking as a political strategist, whether there are goals that you can achieve under this COVID cloud that are political goals that you could achieve, and whether there are also goals that you could achieve in terms of a poorly run economy. And I think what this regime didn't do right from the beginning in terms of debt management is that there was no link between debt management and macroeconomic framework management. So if you're borrowing for brick and mortar projects and by so doing, you're not growing the economy to sustain the debt levels that are growing, because there's nothing wrong with borrowing 9 trillion. There's nothing wrong with borrowing 15 trillion. There's nothing wrong with borrowing 20 trillion, as long as you're growing the economy commensurately so that you can sustain that level of debt. So I think that's where we dropped the ball. We focused too much on brick and mortar capital incentives projects and lost the aspect of productivity. And that is why we find ourselves in the rat that we find ourselves today.
Pretty much. Gabriel, let me bring you in as well. Even as we talk about the government really wanting to check those policy reforms, let me give you just 2 headlines that we wake up to this morning. Number 1, National Land Commission is saying, well, the government was just about to pay 2 billion shillings for 17 properties along the Mombasa Road under the compensation program for the construction of the expressway. 1. Number 2, the World Bank is saying, and IMF are saying, there are 9 trillion worth of stalled projects all the way from Mwai Kibaki's government up to where we are right now in Uhuru Kenyatta's government, which is just on its last year of tenure. They're also saying that we have borrowed $6.8 trillion since 20 years ago up to where we are right now. But they're saying 84% of that has been taken by the Jubilee government. But under the Jubilee government, that's where we have a lot of those projects that are either stalled or completely abandoned. And they're saying that 40% of the projects turned into white elephants. Question this morning: can we, as a country, come up with policy reforms that can turn this country the right direction, like Ukuri Yatani is promising, or we're waiting for people to come in and tell us, we're going to give you this money, but then we need you to do A, B, C, D. Case in point, the World Bank is already forcing us to come up with a new land evaluation index, which is going to be in operation very soon. Case in point, IMF is the one that is now fleecing job reviews and job promotions within the next 2 years. And we've seen it come in point. But when it comes to even managing our wage bill, Gabriel, we have not. Is that the question that we should be asking this morning?
I mean, yeah, it is a question we should be asking, Simba. But I think in terms of coming up with policy reforms, the policies are actually there. If you've gone through, you know, a lot of written documents, the policies and the guidelines are already there.
Yes.
It's just been the willingness to actually follow those policies and implement them in the right way.
Yes.
For example, there's the basic metrics and minimums that a project has to meet before it's undertaken by government. But as the famous scholar Thomas Sowell said, the only person who does not do a cost-benefit analysis is government. Government is the only entity that can undertake a project with minimum benefit and very extremely high cost. They don't look at the justification of those two things, and that's government for you. And that's what Kenya has done. And unfortunately for them now, there's a prefect in place, and the prefect is one of the people who you need to even operate and keep your lights on. So you have to listen. So it's really a case of them saying policy reforms, but it's really Ukur and his team going back to read what their policies actually say. Previously, they have operated out of phone calls and, this project looks good, make the paperwork work. They have not used actual numbers. They've just done what, gut feel kind of projects they've done. We need a highway here, they do it. We need this, it's done. And then, of course, undertaking multiple projects, where we know very well there's a limited number of actually companies that can actually do these projects. For example, if you're doing a certain level of a highway, there are very few companies in this country that can actually undertake such a project.
Yes.
So eventually what you end up having is 3 projects are sharing the same resources. So whoever is doing this project is moving resources from one to the other to the other. So then, of course, you'll end up with stalled projects. I don't think they're worth 9 trillion, to be fair. I think some of them, they might be looking at what the phases might be, because you might be doing a project in 4 phases and you've not even secured the funds for phase 2 and 3 and 4. So you've done phase 1. So I think there might be some bulking up. So 9 trillion is a bit high, I would estimate. But I think probably around, I can't guess the number, but 9 trillion feels high. I think they might be taking what has been phased out, what should be phased out over time.
Yes.
But I think the prefect is here. We just have to do what we should have done.
Oof, pretty much.
I think we have the number from the World Bank audit in terms of incomplete and not incomplete. I think abandoned projects.
Yes,
about
Josh.
1.5 trillion. Yeah. I think Mwendo was right when he says 9 billion is when you account for even incomplete projects. And some of them are in progress. It's just that the funds have not been availed yet. But in terms of abandoned, we're looking at, I think, somewhere around 1 trillion according to the World Bank. I might have to check my notes, but I think 1 trillion sounds more realistic in terms of abandoned.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Seems more right.
Yes, because they're saying there are 522 projects that are worth 1 trillion. But then when you consider the ones that have not been completed, but they were supposed to be completed, yes, that's when you account to around 9 trillion. That is worth our economy, Josh, when you look at it like that, isn't it? Okay, so Josh, what is the way forward in 1 minute, if you may? Because we seem to be stuck until World Bank and IMF come in and tell us, well, before we give you this money, then do this. But when they say that, things work.
I think, as Mwendo said, this is the prefect, and we have no choice but to listen to him because he's the one keeping our lights on.
Yes.
I think in the short term, in the long term, we might have to totally relook at our microeconomic framework management vis-a-vis the debt level, and invest in areas that have return, and these areas have a balance between your brick and mortar and your productivity. So have a balance between your roads and agriculture. In fact, for example, if you look at agriculture, it's the only industry where for every dollar you put in as investment, you are likely to get $10 back. So we need to see the next government, whatever government it will be, looking at CalRO, the research organization, looking at some of this policy. So for example, I'll tell you, Simba, that merging all the research institutions in Kenya, agricultural research, into one monolith is not, has proved not to have worked. So we need to begin to break those again, and then begin to fund those and use some of this money to fund some of these institutions that are more likely to bring back return as opposed to throwing good money after bad.
Pretty much. Out of those projects, we don't have roads, office blocks, dams, and irrigation projects that the World Bank says and the IMF that they were in breach of guidelines that secure financing. That's exactly how we come to the end of our show this morning. Thank you very much, Gabriel and Josh, for taking your time to speak to us. Good morning. My name is Simba. Elijah Charles Gang. I'll see you later on for your news. But for now, enjoy the cold with the rest of us.